Welcome to the No Show. My name's Andrea Edwards.
And my name is Joe Augustin. I have a microphone that's trying to run away from me, but enough of the first world problems. 67% of lyrics in every song since the 60s have been built in some way around love. So humans are built for love, but somehow to love is proving to be quite difficult for us as a planet. Today's theme was inspired by Valentine's Day as we talk about love in as many ways as we can, and also catch you up on the news. And because we're not for-profit kind of show, we won't be focusing on just the clickbaity stuff. And as always, we have a guest with us to give us an added dimension, an added point of view. And Andrea, you'll introduce him.
And our guest today is Scott Harrison. He's the culture catalyst, and you're an ICF performance coach, leadership, sales, and recruitment trainer, mentor. You're host of the Culture Catalyst podcast, and you're a professional speaker. But you tell us more about you, and I think you might be our first Scotsman.
Yeah, well, happy to be here, and thank you for having me today. Yeah, so basically, I had a full career in the people business. So I started out in recruitment agencies. From that, I've worked in startups and MNCs, but through that time, my passion for people took me into training, and training led into coaching. And yeah, I think basically I call myself a people person, and I just love working with people and supporting people. And that's where the podcast came from. The podcast actually came from wanting to, what is it, the Gen Zs call it, spill the tea, and just give it some real talk about HR and people and culture. But yeah, happy to be here.
And you've just recently thrown in the towel and gone out alone, is that right?
Yes, that's right. So for the past 2.5 years, I actually helped build a startup from 0 to 1, which is a social community platform specifically for female empowerment. It's for women only. It's a platform called Koto. And as we got to the stage where the platform was built and up and running, that gave me the opportunity to pursue my own passions and go solopreneur coaching, which is what I want to do. I want to be a full-time coach, and so yeah, I just recently took the plunge. A bit nerve-wracking, but I got some. Thank you, Andrea, for your encouraging words that you gave to me at the time. But yeah, so this is the start of a new chapter of my life.
Yeah. Oh, it's not easy when you put yourself out there into the unknown, right?
Yeah, but I just figured, look, this is my passion. This is what I want to do. I want to support people full time and just give it a go. Just take the risk, take the plunge. I'm old enough now. Doesn't matter.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Do you want to get stuck in? Joe, you got any more thoughts before we get started?
No, just want to encourage you as well. If you're watching right now, I got to do all the things that I'm learning from the kids, right? If you like this, please like and subscribe, tell a friend, all that kind of stuff. It helps the podcast grow. And it's part of our lofty little mission to try and create a world that's better informed. So enough lofty words. Let's get down to the news, we'll get back to talking about love.
But we're talking about love. I want to highlight my youngest son Jax, who turned 16 on the 13th of February. He's watching this for the first time because he's on school holidays. So g'day, Jax.
Hey.
Yeah. All right, so let's get into the quick takes. So this is where we just run through a bunch of stuff that's happening in the world. So we're going to start with love. Anthony Albanese, who's the Prime Minister of Australia. Oh, what's going on there?
Me, sorry.
Announced his engagement on Valentine's Day, which marks the first time an Australian Prime Minister has been engaged while in office. But another piece of news came through last night. Greece has approved same-sex marriage. It's the 16th country in the EU, or 16th country in the world, one of them. Anyway, I thought that was really cool story to add on the love front, Joe.
Anyway, yes. So our next thing is about hate, unfortunately. We saw the shooting in Kansas City where citizens were out celebrating the Super Bowl win. When apparently some kind of disagreement broke out. Kids were involved. Kids are being held right now as suspects in the shooting.
Yeah, and a lot of kids in hospital too.
Yeah.
And Scott?
Well, from hate, we move on to envy. So Amal Clooney, who's George Clooney's wife, beautiful, intelligent, and amazing woman that she is. She's a human rights lawyer who's fought for many people at the United Nations level. Apparently is ugly and has skinny legs. I think some people need to get a life.
Well, they sure do. I suppose we're now onto ambivalence, but we'll stop the those words here. But once again, it becomes clear that us as consumers really are not thinking through the impact of our purchases. So those Valentine's Day roses, which we saw everyone sharing on social media, they're a disaster for societies and the environment in Kenya, which currently provides more than 40% of the flowers to Europe. So check your sources. Where is it coming from and what's the impact? Joe?
Yeah. There's a big report this week about Greenland, and it's about the ice melt, which apparently now is 20% higher than previously understood. Not that it's suddenly become more, it's just that they've realized how much more it was than they thought it was, which of course begs the question, how did the scientists miss it? We may talk about this a little more later on today.
Yeah. Scott?
Oh, absolutely. Yep. And look, one of the big risks of changing climate is disease spread. Now, the New York Times reported that Brazil have a massive dengue outbreak. But in addition to that, reports have shown that Thailand has had a 90% increase in dengue compared to last year. It's mind-blowing to think.
Yeah, so if you're coming to Thailand, make sure you bring your mosquito spray and take it seriously, because some friends have had it and it's not fun. I think it's called the bone-breaking disease. Does that sound right?
Yeah, that's what I've heard as well.
It's excruciating pain. One of my favourite commentators on the climate is a chap called Professor Elliot Jacobson, and he decided it was time to do the math on how much the world is warming, because if you actually look at how much the world is warming, there's so many different numbers out there, and it's like, well, what is it? Anyway, apparently we are now at 1.38 degrees Celsius, which is 2.3 degrees Fahrenheit of warming. So next time you hear someone say 1.1 degrees Celsius warming, say, nope, it's 1.38 degrees Celsius. So this guy's, he's a mathematician, so I trust him. Joe?
Now, I'm not going to lie, I'm one of the people likely to get involved in this. You may have seen videos of people driving and walking around with the new Apple Vision Pro, but watch out. Apparently, it's going to change how our brains work. The article talks about how we're all part of a big experiment. The main thing really about this is because it is a virtual projection of the actual world, if you can imagine it. It's a kind of a fake version of the real thing in front of you. It's going to change a little bit about how our brains are going to figure out where our hands actually are. It's a bizarre thing. If we have time, I'd like to get back to this in a while.
Yeah, because there's a lot of people are returning it.
Well, it's one of those things. You do get a little disoriented at the beginning, and what they're talking about really is how we are going to have a very different approach to the world. Imagine if you saw the world in two different ways for a lot of the time, and that's the big concern for a lot of people, as in, like, it's distorting reality. And some people say it's a great thing. Some people think not so much.
All right.
Well, apparently, the United States is seeking to review its relationship with South Africa following South Africa's case to the ICJ that Israel is committing genocide. That's quite a big one. So President Biden and the Secretary of State's and Defense are looking to take action against South Africa right now. So we'll see how that one plays out.
There's a message for the world, right? If you want to play with us, you got to play by our rules.
Yeah.
So I just want to add a final one from an irony perspective, right? So there's this dude, and he's basically been building his profile about living forever. And he's a very successful billionaire who quit, and he's 100% focused on this. And if you actually look at his life schedule, it doesn't actually look like a very appealing way to live. But anyway, it's now been reported that he has long COVID. I don't know if he was a denier about COVID, but he's got long COVID, and it's been particularly harmful and done a lot of damage in his lungs. So One can only hope with all his money and investment and commitment to his own longevity, he'll work out a way to heal himself so he can share that knowledge with others, because there's a lot of people, I know a lot of people who have got basically permanent oxygen tanks because of long COVID damage. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well,
I thought you'd enjoy him, Joe.
Well, yeah, I had a look at the story, and there are lots of people who are on that mission to live for a very long time. They want to extend their healthy lifespan, and though we talk about a diminished lung capacity of 15%, it sounds like a lot, but a lot of us actually get by with only using 50% of our lungs. So it's quite interesting. I mean, if he's using the full extent of his lungs, he's actually beating about half the people on Earth in terms of how they breathe. We don't usually breathe correctly. Let's get down to some of the so-called meteor news. You may have heard of Donald Trump's statements. We'll call them statements. They're just remarks from the podium during his campaigning. And one of the things that he's talked about, and that's causing a little bit of a stir internationally, is how he's not likely as the leader of America, should he become the leader of America again, to step in to protect countries in NATO should NATO not so-called pay up its bills. And the thing about this is some people talk about it just in terms of like they say it's just rhetoric, just words that are coming out of a man's mouth. But the true implication of this is really the kind of calculus it's going to add or facilitate we shall just talk about Russia as the obvious person in this equation, but also we can look at China as well. It becomes part of the calculus that can lead to the future instability of Europe, especially in the light of Russia, but also, of course, of China. When you find for instance, let's say that Donald Trump is back in power in a year's time, the thought, when you're putting together all the moves on your chessboard, and you have this piece of information and this kind of thing that's been said before on the campaign trail, and this promise, you've actually got somebody, maybe an entire country, against the ropes because something has been said like this before. And just in case, I mean, for instance, I think the comment that was made, and again, whether there's any kind of truth to how that story was told, but from the podium anyway, Donald Trump claimed that he was speaking to some major world leader who presented a hypothetical and said that if a country didn't pay up and they were attacked by Russia, would they intervene? Would the U.S. come in? And he just basically said no. And it's more dangerous than we think. It's okay to see it, I think, on a TV show or a movie. It's another thing to actually hear it on the campaign trail from someone who's got a pretty good chance of becoming the president again of the free world.
You think he's got a pretty good chance, do you?
He's got a good chance simply because of the competition that he's got in Joe Biden. It's one of those things. The polls have been done, and a Democrat can beat Donald Trump in the elections. And this poll is very interesting because in the poll, it was basically described as this: any Democrat could beat Donald Trump, but not Joe Biden.
Yeah, I think we're not going to have any idea what's going on there. If the economy crashes between now and the election, it's going to impact the results. If one of them dies, which is possible, right? The legal case. So we heard that the hush money case is now going to go to court by March, which means we will have a criminal case if he's guilty, right? But just watching the social commentary as well, I don't know. But then I don't know if you guys saw it last night. So apparently Putin has said he supports Biden. Did you see that? It came out last night.
I didn't see that.
Yeah, which is really interesting, right? Because it's been, if there's a great piece on it in the BBC. It's like, so what does this really mean? And what it comes down to is, obviously, by saying Biden, Trump can say, well, Putin's on Team Biden, he's not on Team Trump. So, yeah, that's kind of an interesting little political play in the mix.
You know what? I mean, the Russians have always been about just disinformation, right? Just get you moving in the wrong direction and being unsure of yourself. So, I mean, that's about the best move you can make in that particular respect.
Yeah. But all of this stuff with NATO and the defense spending and all that sort of stuff, it benefits one industry very, very clearly, which is, of course, the defense industry, which is unbelievably powerful. It gets whole countries out of recession. So, banking on that. So, unsurprisingly, global defense spending has increased by 9% to a record 2.2 trillion in 2023. And budgets are expected to increase further amid a deteriorating security landscape. So with Russia's war in Ukraine moving into its third year and the worsening situation in the Middle East, as well as many other challenges the world is facing, it's all driving this increased spending. So in Moscow, I found this phenomenal. The official defense budget was up by more than 60% in 2024, meaning that Russia's total military spending represents 1/3 of its national budget, which basically means it's 7.5% of GDP. So that's obviously a signal that it's very much focused on its war effort. The US obviously remains the largest global military spender, and their budget's nearly $1 trillion. And in dollar terms, it's more than the next 15 countries combined. In second place is China on $219 billion, and then Russia's in third. Britain's ranked fifth. Germany 7th, and France 8th. All NATO members in Europe have spent 32% more on defence since 2014, although only 10 of them spend more than 2% of GDP, which is what Donald Trump is saying. You've got to spend more than 2% of GDP. So, this is not a good sign.
That's some amount of money, isn't it, spent on defence, military? It's crazy.
Yeah.
But well, I have a massive one for you. The UN came out with a report this week revealing a shocking decline in the world's migratory animal populations. So this is the first ever State of the World's Migratory Species report. I'll just run through a couple of quick bullet points. So while some migratory species are improving, nearly half, which is 44%, are showing population declines globally. More than 1 in 5, which is a massive 22%, are threatened with extinction. Like, how's this? Nearly all, 97% of CMS listed fish are threatened with extinction. 97%. The extinction risk is, the extinction risk is growing from migratory species globally. The two greatest threats to both CMS listed and migratory species are overexploitation and habitat loss due to human activity. So climate change, pollution, and invasive species have got a really profound impact on the migratory species. So in summary, globally, 399 migratory species are threatened with extinction and are not currently listed under CMS. Can you even imagine the impact of losing our migratory species? How would that ripple out into the other ecosystems? That's frightening, absolutely frightening.
Just think of the animals like on the salmon run. There's bears and there's, but it's just not what eats the salmon. It's also where the salmon contributes on their journey. And then when it gets out to the ocean, it's just when you start sort of going through the patterns of I think 97%, right?
97% is just phenomenal. Like you say, the ripple effect of that, Andrea, is just because it goes all the way down the line, doesn't it? The eco chain takes a massive hit, but it's scary. It's scary.
Yeah. This is an article that is in Newsweek. It's an op-ed piece, and it's by a military expert who is teaching warfare in West Point. And it's a memo to the expert that says, "Stop comparing Israel's war in Gaza to anything. It has no precedent." The gist of it is essentially that this is a war that has circumstances around it that are just completely different from everything else that has happened before. The combatants are different. The kinds of cultures coming against each other as well are pretty unique because the objectives of both sides are different. You have a country that has a history that makes it particularly sensitive to racially based or religious based hatred and violence, meeting another culture that has a whole different way of weighing up human life and looking at things. So, while we have the Israelis stoutly going in to defend themselves with a war that has created one of the worst outcomes in terms of damage in history. You also have the other side, which does not look at the metric the way the rest of the world does, and the way we are looking at how all this death and destruction is happening, especially the cost of human life. You have to look at it from a perspective of the leaders of Hamas, who actually say that this falls on a different side of the ledger that the rest of us might think of, as in, like, these are the people who are now engaged and have been martyred, and it's a really kind of an upside down kind of a situation. And where we go from here, it's going to be very challenging, because the things that kind of work for one culture, it really is about Western culture and not so Western culture, right? It's about what is seen as a desirable outcome. What is peace? What does peace look like to each side? It does not have the same quality. It does not have the same. It's just not the same for both sides. So, how do you sue for peace in that kind of a situation when both have different objectives? When the objectives are so completely apart? It's incredible. And in terms of the response as well, you have two, like I said, people who are using tactics which frankly haven't been employed on such a scale. And even though it's been a short time, it's really to such dramatic impact. Israel has said in the past, it's gonna respond, it will defend itself, and it will be a strong force, and it's kind of the check that it's written for itself in the past, right? We're going to be very, very strong about these things. We're going to be very, very hard on our replies, and you have Hamas as well, who is just happy to use, I won't say happy, prepared, to use human beings, children, women, or otherwise, as human shields. So, yeah, that basically is the gist of the article. It's really an unprecedented space we're in right now, and we can try to analyze it, but you can't really say from the past what's going to happen, because nothing like this has happened before. We do need something new to be the solution to all this.
Yeah. The numbers were interesting as well when they were comparing previous wars in other sort of civilian intensive areas, right? And the number of deaths in those encounters was much higher than what we're seeing, even though the numbers are extraordinarily bad, right? But yeah, I thought it was just an interesting perspective from someone who that's what they spend their life doing. It was different to the perspective we're hearing, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, you also have some other perspectives not considered in there, because there's intra sort of fighting in the area as well that's not involving the Israeli side, and that's a whole different kind of calculus as well. So, it's really one of those things. It's hard to make a chess move, especially if your opponent isn't playing chess.
All right, so moving on to something a little bit lighter and fluffy. If you haven't had an opportunity to watch it just in the last week, and I'll put it in the weekend reads, obviously, there is some amazing footage of polar bears. Did either of you have a chance to have a look at the videos?
No, not yet.
You just see a little bit of, like a little bit of a fluffy sort of chin, and the camera's sort of looking out as it walks through, and it's brilliant. Yeah, it's really beautiful. But so what basically the scientists did is they strapped cameras to a bunch of polar bears, and the footage is just something else. But it's also a story of an unfolding tragedy. So as the Arctic warms, and it's accelerating rapidly now, polar bears are forced to spend more time on land. And we've been hearing more and more stories about polar bears coming into towns and villages right across the Northern Hemisphere. So sea ice provides a platform from which the bears can hunt seal, and that's their primary food source. But climate change is dramatically shrinking the number of weeks each year where the Arctic oceans are covered in ice. And so that means that the polar bears are forced to spend more time on land. And the problem with food on land is that it's not as calorie dense. So the scientists were basically saying, can polar bears cope with life on land? And in search, they put these recording devices on 20 polar bears in Canada's Hudson Bay. And the ice-free period in this area has increased by roughly 3 weeks since 1979. So there's less ice, 3 weeks less ice per year, which doesn't sound a lot, but it's obviously enough to have an impact. So they got over 115 hours of footage of these guys playing and hunting and eating and scavenging, and it's an insight into their lives. But all of the animals except one in the study lost weight because when they feed on things like berries, it's not enough to starve off their hunger. So nothing feeds a polar bear like a belly full of seal meat. So researchers estimate that the polar bear population in this region has already fallen by 30% since 1987. As we move forward, less ice will only make this bad situation even worse. So watch the videos. They're beautiful, and then let's all act so that we don't see this devastation increasing.
It's actually, Andrea, when I watch those videos of the polar bears, it's a little bit sad to see how emaciated some of them are and how sort of dejected they look. Such majestic creatures. But moving on from that, like in the Financial Post, the title is "The World is Quietly Losing the Land It Needs to Feed Itself." Now, it starts off with the question, land degradation is a growing problem, not just for climate change, but for food and water security. Why isn't it getting more attention? So many people are familiar with human contribution to climate change and perhaps also the loss of biodiversity. But there's a third environmental impact that rarely gets the attention it deserves, and it's desertification. So it's also known as land degradation. So according to this article, the world is rapidly losing usable land for self-inflicted reasons. And that's ranging from intensive agriculture, overgrazing of livestock, real estate development, and climate change. But the crisis is further fueling food and water insecurity. So as well as adding to more greenhouse gas emissions, now, ironically, one of the biggest challenges in the fight against land degradation is universal. We need to eat. So about 40% of the planet's land, which is 5 billion hectares, is used for farming. 1/3 of that 5 billion hectares is to grow crops, and the rest is for grazing livestock. So unfortunately, the world doesn't have a great track record for sustainable agricultural practices. And over the past 500 years, human activity, mainly agriculture, has led to nearly 2 billion hectares of land being degraded. So what that means, though, is that it's contributed to about 500 billion tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent being released from soil disturbance, or about 1/4 of all greenhouse gases, contributing to additional global warming today. So further land degradation until 2050 could add something around 120 billion extra tonnes of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which will worsen the climate change dramatically. That's really worth a read, that one. But it's quite disturbing. But when you look at the actual numbers, and when you actually break it down, it paints a picture, and it's not a pretty picture.
Animals take up something like 80%. I think looking back through what you just said, 80% of the land used for agriculture, and produce only something like 18% of the food. And we need to increase our food by it's something like 50-60%. But based on where we are, how is it even possible that we could even imagine doing that? It's just,
Yeah.
it's just mind-boggling. We're running into this.
Yeah, I mean, I was saying that the big challenge in this particular area actually is because we're losing not just land per se, we're losing soil, right? And it's because of the lack of diversification in the crops. It's because one swath of land does nothing but one kind of crop, and it strips the soil's ability to support a bountiful world. I mean, the ideal kind of scenario is we have a mixture of everything. Farms are supposed to be just a big mix of this and that and whatever, the way nature naturally happens. But I don't know. It's going to be. It's. I mean, what I always bring up, and I'm always sort of the alone in this, is like, what? While that's happening, I do know technology is being they're pushing technology towards recovering land in that way, to try and figure out how to rejuvenate the earth so that it becomes good soil again. I mean, the best solution, of course, is just let a whole bunch of earthworms do their thing, but it's not as easy as that.
No, if the soil's too hot, no, I think what people don't realize is that when soil erosion, so it's the layer of topsoil that's where we grow our food. It gets lost in many, many ways. So it gets lost from just overuse, pesticides, extreme weather events like storms, just wash it all out to sea. But it takes hundreds of years for that earth to come back into health so that we can grow more food. So it's not a problem that we can be messing around with. And and technology, the other day I saw someone share meat, lab-grown meat. And they're saying, I'm never going to try that. And I'm like, well, I think we all might be trying lab-grown stuff in the future, because based on what we're seeing about how we're treating the land, I think we're going to have no choice but to have very open minds to alternative ways of eating. We'll have our Wally milkshakes, or
Well, I mean, look, if you had a chicken McNugget in recent times, you've had an alternative form of chicken anyway, so you'll be okay. Some news that we might not hear much about in Singapore for a long time. There's a cannabis extract that has been found to basically kill off deadly skin cancer cells. So this is out of Australia, and it's a number of research teams that have found this to be true. That this is I think it's the Stavia strain. No, is Stavia? No, there's I can't remember the name of it, but it's a particular strain of cannabis that actually is pretty bad for melanoma. It makes the cells kill themselves. But this, of course, hasn't been done in a clinical trial yet. This has been in, I guess, in the petri dishes, that sort of thing. But it's certainly very promising, and actually brings to mind for me something about the use the use of things people think conservatively are difficult, like maybe a bit of a taboo, right? So like here in Singapore, for instance, it's strictly off limits, and in the US as well, because Nixon was trying to promote the whole thing about I wasn't trying to promote war. He was trying to enlist people to fight in the Vietnam War. And basically, the psychedelics was making it very hard for people not to love everyone, and basically hard for them to go and engage in warfare. So they declared war on drugs. And so that spread around the world. And for that reason, we're actually behind the curve on so many things that science could have been able to tell us about in terms of psychedelics, in terms of natural extracts, such as the ones you find from the Stavia particular strain of cannabis, and many others. But we're coming along, and I don't know. We'll see. I hope for the day when we sort of get some dispensation from some of these restrictions. I've heard some good things as well about some of the other extracts from cannabis. Not the one that gets you high, but the one that maybe helps you to be a little bit more calm.
Yeah. Well, I'm in Thailand, so there's plenty of it around here in many, many forms. But the it becoming an evil drug, I take it back to the early days of the blues. That's when that that sort of sentiment first started to build, because it was black musicians getting stoned and playing amazing music, and it was leading the young white folk astray. But I'll be really surprised if Singapore doesn't get on top of this, because one, it's obviously the medical side is amazing. Two, it's one of the two, next to bamboo, it's one of the two best building material with potential that's truly sustainable. It grows fast, it sequesters carbon. Like, there's so many things. There's another Weekend Reads where I'm going to talk about, they've made these bricks. They can't be external bricks, they're in like internal sort of bricks, but in the building industry, they're really looking into it. Clothing, there's so many uses for it. So, based on how Singapore usually embraces opportunities in the research and technology space, I'd be surprised if it doesn't make a shift. Would you guys? Can you see it? I know. It's done a great job.
Well, it's again this thing about the checks you've signed in the past, right? So Singapore has signed too many checks regarding its stand on drugs. So it's going to make it very difficult for it to kind of roll it back. Partly because, and we've had these big discussions as well. It's like why, for instance, Singaporeans who go abroad and partake and come back, and why are they prosecuted? It's about the social contract that we have in Singapore. We have, at some level, kind of agreed that the bigger, the majority, shall we say, has kind of agreed on this set of standards. And some things are just outside of the standards, and that's the trouble. I mean, look, but to be fair though, we do use opioids. It's in all our medical stuff. So stuff that comes in through the right channel gets accepted. I mean, look, the other socially, what should be a socially troublesome drug that we all use is alcohol. I'd love to see some of that replaced, and I'm sorry to say that in the presence of a Scotsman as well.
I'm actually teetotal. I don't drink alcohol at all. One of the only Scottish people who don't drink. But
it's like I'm one of the only Australians I know who don't drink beer.
So
never have, or?
Oh no, I used to drink when I was younger, but I stopped. Actually, I used to work in the whiskey bond. There's a whiskey called Ballantine's you may have heard of, or Chivas Regal. That's in my hometown in Scotland. And I worked there when I was at university, and I saw so many stark raving alcoholics due to their job, due to working around the alcohol. They couldn't resist. And it put me off for life, genuinely. Like these guys that were working in the whiskey distilleries had such an addiction to alcohol. I thought, I don't ever want to be like that.
It's so funny. I was talking to my sons the other day. They didn't know. They had tasted Guinness for the first time. So when I was working in London, I did a contract with Guinness and launched a new beer, which was fascinating. But there was a group of guys that used to go around to all the events, the corporate events that Guinness sponsored, and set up their beer tents. And it was a very similar. They were great, but they were always drunk. I'm sure they're not around anymore.
Yeah. Do you know, just very quickly, because I don't want to deviate, but when you put whiskey in a barrel and you put it away for 18 to 20 years, you set the barrel on fire inside in the beginning. So what you used to see was guys walking around with a face full of charcoal. And when they had charcoal all over their teeth, you knew they'd been sucking through a straw out of the barrel. The charcoal was all stuck to their teeth.
Oh boy!
Yeah, it's a true story.
Yeah, nice.
Charcoal in the teeth, and you'd say you've been drinking.
Yeah. Naughty boy. All right. So in Science Alert, if you're interested in what's going on in the world, Science Alert's got a Facebook page and it shares some pretty good stuff. So Joe mentioned it earlier, and this is a different perspective, but the title is Greenland is literally rising from the ocean as it loses its fringe of glaciers. So we know that Greenland is melting. We know that it's melting 20% more than what was expected. And, the reason this, so one of the things I always say to people, there's so much that we don't know in the climate space, what's going on in Antarctica. And it's literally because we can't get people or technology to those places to understand it. So, and also the data that we can, in the machines that process the data, as they get stronger, we're learning more. Like just the other day, I shared an article. They've found the coral reefs in the world are something between 20 and 40% bigger than they actually they knew. Like, it's like that's just there. That's something we snorkel and dive in, and just now we're finding this out. So it's fascinating. So we all know that Greenland's one of the main sources of meltwater flooding that's happening all around the world, and it's impacting the not the east coast, the southern coast of the US more. And I actually find that kind of an interesting conversation. Where the ice melts and where it impacts is not logical to me. It just it happens up there and it impacts down there. It's kind of interesting. But anyway, but what this means is Greenland, the actual island of Greenland, is rising from the oceans. And basically, Greenland has been gradually rising since the last ice age, which was 12,000 years ago. And they've got data from 58 GPS stations across the country. And that's obviously revealing that melting is speeding up, but also that the actual land mass is elevating out of the water. And there's a whole new island that they've named. So, and it's the loss of mass from these outer glaciers that is causing this greater rise. But here's some numbers, right? So over the last decade, Greenland's bedrock has risen up to 20 centimetres, 7.9 inches, which is a rate of about 2 metres, 6.6 feet per century. So that's significantly bigger than sea level rise, significantly bigger. And so what they're saying is, what's happening is previously compressed Earth has been liberated from its surrounding weight, so the ice, and so it relaxes into its more naturally expanded shape. So they compare it to a squashed pillow that can now puff up and take up more volume. So
the story of my waistline.
That's it. Okay. It adds to a growing list of climate change's astonishing large-scale physical reshaping of our world. In this case, we're quite literally reshaping the Earth. So I found that an absolutely fascinating story because, it's in lots of different. This impacts lots of different things. Like where the weight on the Earth exists matters, right? So we've put all this weight on the Earth, and now these other areas of the Earth are losing their weight. So and you think about that. What does that mean? How's it going to change things? I find it fascinating. What do you guys think?
Well, a little comment about the, like where water is lost and where it actually affects the world as well. It's something to do with also the way, the world actually works physically from a physics perspective, right? So because the Earth is spinning, more displacement of matter that moves around, so i.e. water, is going to find itself closer to the equator where the spinning is. So that's part of the reason why I guess that distribution of the additional water is not just shared everywhere at the same level. If you're nearer the place of the equator, I think we're going to be more affected by that. Yay for us!
Yeah, exactly.
I think as well, Andrea, like when you talk about like the glaciers and things, what people don't realise, and this was through the links that you had actually sent, and I'd done a little bit of research because it interested me too, but apparently we lose 42 gigatons of ice from glaciers each year. But that's a staggering amount, and it makes you wonder, well, if we're losing 42 gigatons per year, in 10 years from now, what's that going to look like? And if you tie that back to what you just said about the land rising, it's quite a thought, to be honest.
Well, the big issue around it is it's not so much the melting; it's the shrinking of the ice, right? So, one of the climate Paul Beckwith that I follow, he's a systems climate scientist. So I like systems scientists because they look across everything, right? Yeah. And so basically, the amount of ice that's been lost in Antarctica just in the last 12 months, he believes is the equivalent to the Arctic having a blue ocean event. Right, so they're predicting a blue ocean event in the Arctic when all the ice is gone. But actually, there might have been enough ice already lost off Antarctica to create a blue ocean event. So where the ice goes, it's dark water, which absorbs more heat, and we've got a heat energy imbalance, right? So it could be what's happening in Antarctica that's causing that because we're having a blue ocean event, but nobody's really talking about it. So it's an interesting sort of idea, and there's there's a lot of conversations about a lot of different things, and sort of there's no one answer that is conclusive yet. But if you start sort of listening to them all and you're sort of pulling it all together, you're like, okay, yeah.
Well, moving back over to stateside, Business Insider done a feature on Boeing. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly in my Scottish accent. Boeing, the aircraft. Boeing is a wake-up call. So America's business gambled that greed is good. Now they're losing that bet big time. So, like, I think everyone's heard the news of the Alaska airplane that lost its door in January. But according to the piece that was written by the Business Insider, it's pretty clear that Boeing's problems run far deeper. So they expose decades of American corporate philosophy gone awry. So Boeing, again, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, is a quintessential example of America's rotting business culture over the past 40 years. The company relentlessly disgorged cash to shareholders when it could have spent it on building better and safer products. So investments that could have benefited employees, communities, and even other corporate stakeholders, they were often sacrificed, for the altar of efficiency and free cash flow. So Boeing focused on pleasing Wall Street because that's how American executive believes companies should operate. But the company really needs to rethink, its very reason for existing and what it should provide to society as an enterprise. Like, a good American company isn't just a vehicle for financial returns. It's first and foremost an employer, a contributor to economic or technological innovation, and it should be a source of US power. So what is required is a philosophical counter-revolution.
Philosophical. It's what, don't worry, I fall over words too.
So it's the end of the week. But yeah, what is required is a philosophical counter-revolution. But it paints a picture that it really does paint a picture and a story to look at how they do business and what they care about and what they don't care about.
Yeah. This whole Boeing story, I got to tell you. So I used to work for an aerospace company in Australia, my first job out of the military, and working with Boeing was really a real privilege, So this was back in the early 90s. It was before the McDonnell Douglas sort of basically executive takeover. The two companies sort of merged. Initially, it was with the Boeing CEO, then it was the McDonnell Douglas CEO, and that's when they moved towards Wall Street. The headquarters with all of their executive teams moved to a different place out of Seattle, and I actually find it really heartbreaking to see such a great company, and it really is a great company. The engineers, the aerospace engineers, phenomenal people, great minds. Like, the idea that this group of people that I met and worked with in those days weren't given the space to experiment and create sustainable planes over this period. Instead, the company just focused on greed, more, sell, but that sort of wider sort of commentary about the last 40 years of American greed and the culture of it, and here we are today looking at, what we're facing. And I think Boeing's the one that keeps being held up, and as it rightly should. But it's a massive philosophical counter-revolution that's required right across the board. But there's a disconnect, from the executive level. There's such a disconnect. We've all worked with American companies. We all know what it's about, right?
Yeah. I mean, it has a lot to do, I think, with also just government oversight in terms. I mean, I think Americans don't like the idea of government doing anything, but in Singapore, for instance, what I've been heartened to find out about is the way things move towards environmental responsibility. It's become part of the process of being a Singapore company. If you're moving further and further up the value chain, you actually have responsibilities to the environment as part of the deal, And I think it would be very interesting if the U.S. in because of its great influence in the world was able to create something like that as part of that, a set of incentives. I mean, you can't just say don't. You should say do because, right? And I think if companies need to be incentivized that hey, if you can shave corporate tax down by a few more points if you meet these environmental standards and it's worthwhile to shareholders, then it becomes a worthwhile target. Because if profit motivates you, then use profit to motivate you in the right direction. That's kind of, yeah. Look, Singapore is not the I would say from a perspective of doing the right thing or the most desirable thing. It's not always automatic here, and what happens here is a kind of a incentive towards the right door to choose, right? And I think more people or more countries can try and do that, try and figure out how they can do that. Of course, the situation here is very different. We do have a slightly different political environment. It's it's a lot easier to get things done because the team's on board, right? So, but yeah, if that were to change in America, if for instance, and this could happen, without government, it could happen with the stock exchange. The stock exchange can decide that this is part of its policy regarding listing, or the SEC is the government, but the different parties involved can start steering people towards that direction. It will be unpopular in the beginning because it's un-American for people to make choices for you, but I don't know. I think it could make a big difference.
Yeah, so this whole keep government out of business, right? So they kept government out of business, and it sort of replicated around the world. And obviously, Singapore is a great example. China is a great example where the government is involved. But all of those countries that basically had free reign for the last 40 years, well, here we are. You were allowed to do whatever the hell you wanted to do. You've done whatever the hell you want to do, and now we're on the point of biosphere collapse. So, something's got to give. Either we keep running down that path, or we recognize that that's not the right path, and we change things. And this whole idea about what Americans do and don't like, but also the individualism sort of driving societies, which we've talked about many times before, it's pointing us in the wrong direction. So can we grow up, learn our lessons, and move in a different direction? What do you guys think?
Joe.
Well said, Scott.
No, I thought I was interrupting you there. I thought it was a perfect comment from you, Scott, about the whole thing. Even and I thought that actually is kind of the situation that we face in the world. It's not our place to say, but we need to say, right? I mean, that's really it. It's kind of like, how do you say it nicely? It's not easy to say it nicely. We got to get used to not saying it nicely. I think one thing in Singapore, what I've noticed over the past couple of years is, especially like just when you're talking about government, like the EDB and the MOM, etc., they're asking for ESG policies. So ESG policies are becoming more and more prominent as mandatory in Singapore. Even when we, set up Koto, the VC, one of the mandatory requirements was the first thing we did was put an ESG policy in place. So I think I'm quite proud of Singapore for taking a sort of lead in that sense. I don't know what your own both thoughts are, but for companies I've seen ESG policies are very prominent now in Singapore, and the EDB and the MOM are asking for it.
Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong has been at the front of this conversation on the global stage for years. He believes that climate change is a risk, and he understands the risk to Singapore, which is why the construction that you can see right across, whether it's, I think the what do you call it? Not Marina Bay Sands, the
barrage.
The barrage. I think that's all part of it. I think that big road under the sea is part of it. We don't talk about it. It's because that's not the Asian way. You just get on with it and do it and build walls, sea walls where you need to build them to protect properties and people. So it hasn't been politicized. It's not a conversation. It's not a case of, do you agree with this? Do you not agree with this? It's a case of, this is a problem and we need to get ready for it. And, I've said before, I think Singapore, like everywhere else, didn't realize how quickly acceleration would happen. But they've taken it on board and they're moving really, really quickly. And the education campaigns, how to protect yourself in wet bulb temperatures, all that sort of stuff that the government is pushing out, So there's no doubt, just read the Straits Times. There's no doubt. If it's in the Straits Times, it's true, right? So yeah, and I it's phenomenal what they're doing. I think they're a model for the world to be looking at in many, many ways.
Well, you'll get lots of discussions about the environment and everything else on this show regularly, but we won't talk always about love. So let's get to the theme today: love.
Yeah, love. So Valentine's Day was this week, and I don't know about you, but my social media feed was full of men and women receiving lots of flowers, chocolates, teddy bears, you name it. I actually have never liked Valentine's Day ever, but as an adult, I really made a very clear, it was just to me another mass consumption. When I was at university, I worked in Hallmark cards, and if you ever work in a Hallmark cards factory, you can see that what we celebrate. But that real recognition that it's just commercial doesn't appeal to me. I'm not a very traditional person in many, many ways. But as time has gone on, of course, I've also seen the consumption of it. I've been reading research like we shared earlier about Valentine's roses coming from Kenya to Europe. 41% of the roses provided come from Kenya, where women are subjected to slavery, sexual abuse, where it's destroying the environment. So, the idea of buying something that's then wrapped in plastic or it's just I just can't justify it. And it took him a while to sort of come to terms with not buying into it for me, because he was worried he'd make me upset. But eventually he realized, we don't do anything anymore. We don't do Christmas. We don't do birthdays. We don't do anything because we don't need it, So we're trying to step away from all of that mass consumption. But what about you guys? Because I think a lot of it for men would be based on the ladies or the partners they're with. So can you get away with it and not be in trouble?
Well, I think in the early days you do the universal dance of love, right? So you do everything you think that's the right thing to do, and then gradually you get sort of course corrected and you say what is important, what isn't. And I know my other half is not very keen on overspending on things that are too expensive on the day, right? So flowers are definitely out. And this year, actually, it was quite interesting because I discovered it was Valentine's Day way into the afternoon, because I don't do social media, so it wasn't all over my feed. And it just came up when I finally looked at something in the afternoon and went, oh, it's Valentine's Day, and I just walked over and just wished her happy Valentine's Day, and that was basically it. So no, I'm a low maintenance guy, and fortunately I seem to be married to a reasonably low maintenance woman.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah, I think I'm similar to both of you. So I'm a low maintenance guy, and I'm very fortunate to have a low maintenance wife. But I'm equally fortunate that my wife is similar to you, Andrea, where she feels like it's just commercialism. She doesn't want me to buy her roses and teddy bears. What we would prefer to do is save up that money and go on a trip to Taiwan or Korea once a year, or basically, I think, to put a finer point on it, we don't need one day to spend lots of money to tell each other we love each other. That's just there. We know it. And but I do agree with you as well about the eco side of it. All those carcinogenic wrappings and the bad side. But yeah, we don't do Valentine's Day, and it's not because we don't love each other. It's because we don't believe in the consumerism. So
yeah. But I don't know, I just don't feel like the message is getting through. I mean, if you live in a country where they don't have roses that are grown, they're coming from somewhere. Find out where they're coming from. Do your research, and do you really need to buy into it? I suppose it's just, we're kind of at the point where, you've just had Chinese New Year, so I'm sure there was a lot of stuff consumed and bought around that, right? It's not as bad as Christmas. That's the worst celebrated a day of the year as far as waste is concerned. Chinese New Year? Do you think it's getting out of control, or are people starting to sort of contain it? What do you think?
Well, I think one of the great things about the Chinese culture or tradition is that we eat everything. So,
Mm.
you know, if a lot of the stuff that is consumed around Chinese New Year has to do with food, so in that sense, at least it's not as wasteful. It's not something that is just for the sake of it. I'll have to respectfully, of course, acknowledge that a lot of red paper is used, at that time of the year. But yeah, apart from that, it's a lot of auspicious foods get bought and consumed at premium prices. But yeah, that's basically it. It's a lot of overconsumption in terms of the food I think we eat. If you live in corporate Singapore as well, or you interact with corporate Singapore, there's a pretty good chance that by today you have had at least 5 lo heis. That literal tossed salad, which everyone feels that they have to do, and that's one, that's an area where we spend a little bit too much on a bit of greenery with a sprinkle of salmon on it.
Yeah, and then salmon, of course, the stuff that's going on around there. But all right, so so more broadly, the concept of love, right? So it took me a long time to be able to use love comfortably in a non sort of romantic way, like just love for fellow humans, love for the earth. I don't know, for some reason, when I was young, it sort of was one of those words. It's kind of like for me, it's like God. It has a meaning that I found difficult to sort of go outside of. But the love, as a definition, is an intense feeling of deep affection, and yet, everywhere we look around the world, we seem to be experiencing or witnessing rage, which is violent, uncontrollable anger. So we've really got a problem in the love stakes, right? But Antonio Guterres, and we've talked about him before, and I'm not a big fan of people criticizing him because I think he's doing the best that he can based on what he's got and the power that he has in the world, and he's using his voice. And he put out a big call for peace this week, and it's peace in the world, peace within communities, peace with justice, peace with nature. And, I just took that as a call to love and a call to action for the greater good of all life on earth. But our leaders keep moving us in these other directions, the destruction of war. It's like accelerating our situation. It's growing. How do we stop this? How do we, do we just need to replace all the male leaders with women so that we can get more diplomacy in place? I think we need to be looking at radical solutions to the problems, because these old white males, typically, Netanyahu, Putin, Americans to an extent in both parties, we can't just keep going down this path, because it really is accelerating the apocalypse. Are we that bloody stupid? How do we turn it around? Any thoughts?
I don't know if you can. I mean, because part of it is love and hate are basically the same thing from a different perspective, right? I mean, it is, we do things out of love that are hateful to other people. I mean, that's really what's going on right now. There is the combatants on both sides, they love what they love, and because you're attacking what they love, they defend, stoutly. On the topic of whether or not women leaders would be a better solution, I don't know. I've seen a number of fights. Women go at it much worse than guys do.
It's always ridiculous.
That's actually a good point that you made there, Joe, and I've never actually thought of it that way myself. But both sides of the conflict, in their head, they believe that there's positive intent. They're fighting for what they believe they love. So you actually articulated that very nicely. I thought
so too.
Because I've never ever thought about it that way. But they're actually fighting what they believe they love. So that hatred that we're seeing, they're viewing that as love, and I know to us that's a warped way of seeing it, but to them, they actually believe that there's positive intent in what they're doing. So it's a pretty cool way to articulate it. But I just feel that the world has got far too much conflict and far too much hatred, and there's just not enough love in the world in general. And I wish it was a better place. I was saying, Andrea, to Joe, when we were waiting to come on, like, I've got a daughter, and, what sort of world is she going to grow into, a young adult into? I would like it not to be this one that we're living just now. So, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I got two boys, 16 and 17, right? So they're going to be doing national service in Singapore at a time when war is escalating. So there's more war and conflict now than there was before World War II. World War II, right? So we're really in a bad situation.
Yeah.
But before World War II, we weren't dealing with the climate and biosphere emergency that we're dealing with now. So it's the most idiotic thing I could ever imagine humanity doing. Like, we've already been running headlong into this sort of environmental and biosphere destruction, and now we're saying, oh well, let's just run even faster, and that's the thing that, like social media. There's some articles that have just been coming out recently talking about there's people are spending less and less and less time on social media. And you said, Joe, that you're not on social media much, right? And I noticed this, like, people have completely stepped away from it. So there's this conversation happening on these digital platforms where people who can't cope with the aggression and the violence and the hatred and the ugliness are stepping away. So that just means that there's less people fighting against that. And it also means that the ugly, hateful, divisive voices actually appear to be bigger and have more influence than they should. So to me, it's always one of the things of, even though it can be ugly there, if you've got the courage and the strength and the resilience and the mental health, because that's important, get involved in bringing love back into the world, sharing love. Like, we need to be, we're 70% of the population. We need to sort of keep the energy and the voice up. And I think, obviously vote for the right people, if we're in a country, where you've got the right to do that, where you can make a difference. Like, I think Russia's going to an election soon, right? Yeah. No, Putin's going to get back in, right? So it's not like he's got any opposition.
In a completely free and fair election, of course, again, this thing back to love and hate being opposite sides of the same thing. The challenge is always going to be that people are usually pushed to action because what they love is being threatened. That really is it. I mean, you think about the average father who will, he can be as calm, as chill as ever, but you just, if you cross the wrong lines, you're going to show up, right? That is kind of what pushes people, because the thing is, if you're in love and you feel happy, you're in a state of inaction. It's actually kind of the trick that biology plays on us, so that we stay in families. We are not gonna keep looking for the next place to be. We begin to settle down and do things. So love kind of leads to inaction, and if you think about it, you kind of have to motivate a kind of threat against what you love. So like yourself, like myself, I know what triggers me, right? Someone comes for the truth, and I'm going to get really defensive about it, because that's what I love. And for you, it's the environment. It's so everybody's is kind of driven in some way by hate. We are much more likely to do something because we hate something. Just speaking for myself, I've never been able to keep a diet, but the only time I did ever do that was because I was getting ready for an insurance premium, and I was going to have to pay extra because I was above a certain weight, and I really hate that.
The money.
I was motivated. Yeah. Whatever it was. So someone was coming for my money, which I love.
Yeah,
I like it. I like it, Joe.
But this is a really interesting thing, right? So I also, so the idea that love makes you apathetic, or what was the word you used? love makes you
It just leads to inaction, and it makes you inactive.
inaction.
You're not motivated. Yeah.
Yeah, but okay, that's kind of like, because to me, love drives action, if depending on what it is. But
Yeah.
I think since the 1960s, predominantly since the 1960s, the majority of people in the world, their life has gotten better.
Yeah.
Like, no matter where you are in the world, right? And we're at the end of the heyday. We're at the end of that abundance, and we're transitioning into this new time for humanity, which is part of the reason why we're seeing a lot of war and conflict and people unsettled. It's wars over water have started, war over food has started, all of that stuff's all begun already, right? But I don't think we've also accepted as a global society that we've finished an era for humanity. And that era was actually unhealthy for us. But one of the things that it's done is it's made us very apathetic. And a lot of people are still expecting it to continue. Things will get better. Things will come back to what they were, that sort of mindset. But that's not possible for that to happen. We can't keep following that path. So which brings fear into it. So I don't know if hate is the opposite of love. I always say contempt is the opposite of love. But so I think there's a passivity based on an expectation of something that no longer exists to be in the future. And that concerns me, because I think people are going to wake up one day and go, oh, I wasn't expecting this, because people aren't paying attention. They're not. Conversations I have, I'm blown away by how little people are paying attention, even to their own personal risks. So I don't know. I think it's also a transition of awareness, and the first phase of that awareness is fear. And we're going to live in a world consumed of fear. Like, the greatest threat right now is the more and more people wake up to the crises we face, the more and more people that we're going to have this global despair sort of sinking in, because it's hard not to go into despair when you start going deep into all of these different issues, right? And it takes a long time to go through the process before you can come out the other end and move into a state of acceptance, right? But a lot of people can never get to that end. And, we're starting to see eco-terrorism, because people are literally scared for their life and their future. And so they're starting to act out and do these crazy things, which is going to be a whole new thing that we're going to have to be dealing with. But people don't have the emotional maturity to deal with this, what we're dealing with. And so that probably concerns me more than anything else.
Yeah.
You guys seeing that?
It's funny, because when you say the emotional maturity, Andrea, and I'm going to use a much more simplistic example, but to prove or back up your point, humans find it so easy to hate, but so hard to love. Now, I'm going to use a very basic example. If you go to the UK, right, football teams, right, you'll get Rangers, Celtic, Man United, Chelsea, they will hate each other, like real hatred, to the extent they will fight and they will harm each other out of hatred, simply because they're not from that team. So they find it so easy to hate, but so difficult to love. And just when you mentioned they don't have the emotional maturity, and I know my example is sort of deviating away from actual conflict and war, but I think it's a good example to highlight how easily humans can hate each other and how difficult they can find it to accept and love each other. Or even take Scotland and England. The two countries hate each other. And this is centuries later, and there's no reason. But just because you're English and I'm Scottish, then that's it. There's just I don't like. And it goes on for centuries and centuries. So yeah, I agree with what you're saying, definitely. I think it's a good point. I don't know if my examples are the best examples to use, but
but I think it's important, because it's a tribal example. But I remember when my parents went through a divorce, and it was just the most ridiculous thing I'd ever seen. I was still sort of a teenager at the time. And I remember looking at it and just going, so these two people who created a family don't get on anymore. But the way they were behaving towards each other during that divorce, I was just like, how can we ever expect world peace when two people have slept next to each other for 20 years? this is how they behave, you know, and I really took that out, you know, working in offices, you know, just watching how people were interacting with each other. But how can we have world peace if we can't even get on with the person who lives next door or sleeps in her own bed after the fact, you know? Yeah.
Well, you know, there was a study that just came out. I'm sure you're familiar with the original study, the one about, you know, if you put kids in a room and you leave a marshmallow for them and you tell them if you don't eat the marshmallow now, you'll be able to get more a bit later on. There's some new research recently that is following up on that, and they realized that a very significant aspect of whether or not people were able to defer their satisfaction or their desires had a lot to do with social economic status, how well off they were, how secure they were in what they had. And you know, the thing about love is that love exists in a state of abundance. It is easy to exist in a state of abundance. And the challenge we have right now is that the world is not easily convinced that it's a state in a state of abundance, even though, as you say, objectively the world is better than it's ever been in terms of you know, the quality of life, amount of food available. You know, as difficult as it is, there are people who listen to this and go like, "Oh, my life is difficult." Yes, but trade it any time for someone living 100 years ago, and I don't think you want to do that, right? So we are objectively in a place where everything is really good or better anyway, but we don't feel that way. And when we don't feel that way, it's easy to get upset about someone leaving the cap off a toothpaste, for instance, right? I mean, I'm mixing some metaphors here, but you know what I mean, right? I mean, listen, when billionaires divorce each other, it's always amicable. when you have enough, when you have a lot, when it doesn't matter, then it really isn't that much of a problem. When you have enough friends, when you have enough whatever, you don't feel like you're going to lose out socially when you're parting ways. But you know, when a couple breaks up, if they don't feel that they have the capability to have an infinite number of friends and contacts and the social life and what have you, then they get defensive about everything, and then it's about my kids, your kids, my friends, your friends. So I think about the world that we have, and I really think to make the rest of it possible, we have to try and figure out abundance, and abundance may come in a way that may not be easy to balance off as well. As in, if we find a way to make everyone, not everyone, you can't do that, but if you find a way to make 80% of the world happy, right? And maybe, you know, in that disastrous scenario that you seem to think of, you know, like in terms of WALL-E, what happens when people don't have to work anymore, they don't have to struggle. If that is the basis of it, maybe then there's a chance to go, okay, well, there's no real reason to fight. Why don't we look at the higher things that we can try to achieve? It's only once the basics are taken care of that you can begin to do that. I you know, like when people look, you know, when they talk about conflict in other parts of the world, one of the biggest things that really underlies it all is a state of not enough, right? If there's unemployment, it's almost surely going to lead to violence when there is some catalyst, and that's proven itself over and over again. So it's not an easy thing to try and do, but I think that's where we need to try and make it happen.
I think that you're just so spot on there. You know, I think we were talking about it. There's this group of men in Pakistan called Men Who Lean Against Walls. We talked about that before, right? And it's it was such an interesting sort of idea. There's a huge percentage of this generation of men who've got nothing, no work. We're seeing it in China now. There's youth unemployment at the highest rate. Young people, especially young men, without something to do. Sorry, that's a problem for society. And let's focus on the people who aren't feeling safe, who are feeling safe, right? They can be the ones that build the love in the societies. The people who are struggling need to be supported and nurtured and brought up, right? But the people who are feeling safe, it's their job to lead. And so if they're all disappearing because it's gotten too ugly, then that's going to make it harder to succeed.
Yeah.
All right, Scott, final thoughts?
No, I think Joe articulated that last point very nicely again. I agree completely. You put it in a completely different perspective from the way I was looking at it at first. So very nicely put, Joe. And I agree with what you just said to close off there as well, Andrea. So yeah, but no, just thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to have been on, and I just hope my accent is understandable.
But before you go,
yeah.
Go, Joe.
No, I was just saying I've been resisting all this time from breaking into a Hibernian accent myself, actually.
But I just want to say, we said Boeing needs a philosophical counter-revolution. Can you say that now, Scott? Philosophical counter-revolution.
Philosophical counter-revolution.
There we go. Well done.
I'll never forget that one.
Yeah, I do it all the time. Don't worry.
Now every time from here on out, whenever you or Joe meet me, you'll say, "Oh, there's the philosophical counter-revolutionist."
Yeah, just
there's something about that accent that makes it sound like you have a beard on when you're saying philosophical.
Yeah. You know, Joe, when I first arrived in Singapore 14 years ago, so what you're hearing now is a very slowed down pronunciation, or enunciated. Like, this is not my normal way I would speak to even just my parents. But man, I had trouble. And can I tell you a very quick story, which is quite funny? When I first arrived in Singapore and I was doing recruitment, and it was to build an oil and gas business for a company out here in Singapore, my only job in the beginning was business development, was to get in contact with drilling managers for oil drilling rigs. And I would call up and say, "Can I speak to the drilling manager?" Well, I said the word drilling in 25 different tones and ways, and not once could they understand. I was like, drilling, drilling. They couldn't understand me, and I would hand it to the guy next to me who was local, and he would say drilling. Yeah. That's what I said 25 times. So over the years, I learned to slow it down and pronunciate better and enunciate more. But if I was speaking to my family, you probably wouldn't understand me.
Yeah. The Australian accent isn't much better. But a word like drilling's got two problem letters in the middle of it, R and L. So having Andrea, an R in the middle of my name, so I always got Andrea. So yeah, it's just it's a struggle. But I think the Scottish accent is a bit of a harder one for most people in this part of the world.
I think
if all three of us broke out in the hardcore local accents that we live in the midst of, we'd be completely hard to listen to.
Oh, God,
not already.
Can you imagine?
Yeah, it's true. It's very true.
Aussie, Singlish, and Scottish. There's a combination.
Mix the three together, and you've got something unique.
Oh yeah. I can imagine. All right. So the final question is, what's keeping you distracted at the moment? TV, books, podcasts, whatever. Joe, do you want to go first?
Yeah. So you remember the old series Quantum Leap? You probably remember Scott Bakula and that series, right?
Well, Sam Beckett.
Scott Bakula.
Oh, is that what it was?
Yeah, he's anyway, the series came and went back in the day, but it's been rebooted. I don't know whether you're familiar with that, but NBC now is showing the second season of the rebooted series. It has a Chinese or Asian lead, which is very interesting. And it's actually not too bad a show as well. It's what they've done is taken the original concept and actually made it sort of a sequel to the original story. So it continues sometime in the future after the character Sam Beckett. That was the name of the character in the original movie, the original series. Was Sam Beckett, who was played by Scott Bakula.
Yeah. I remember Ziggy. Ziggy was the computer or whatever, the hologram guy.
Yeah. So that's also evolved into a modern day interpretation. So if you enjoy the idea of what would you do if you had a chance to change history, that's a show you might enjoy. And they managed to squeeze in a little bit of a romance storyline as well. So, something to satisfy those Korean drama people amongst us as well.
Mm. All right. Scott, what's keeping you distracted?
We're actually watching, there's an Apple TV series with Jason Momoa called C. I don't know if you've seen it, no pun intended. And it's basically, it's in the future, and humans destroyed the world, and the humans evolved into being blind, and being blind it was better. But it's actually a really, really good series. And it's about quite fitting for what we're talking about today, but it's about humans destroying the world by too much technology and too much weapons advancement. So after the world was destroyed by nuclear war or whatever it was, humans evolved being blind, and being blind prevented them from being so destructive. And then it's a whole new world. It's called C, S-E-E. It's quite good.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
It's also actually quite an interesting demonstration of the idea I was talking about earlier about love. Everybody on both sides there loves something really much.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, I watched. There's a series on Netflix called Griselda. Have you guys seen that?
Oh yeah.
So female narco in the 80s. So that sort of 80s sort of vibe, and it's fascinating, and it's incredibly sad too, like the whole thing, but how she was underestimated because she was a female narco, but also there's a female cop story at the same time who was also underestimated. So to me, that was the powerful thing. But the mother, being a mother, there's a lot of violence, obviously. But the other thing that I watched last night is The Greatest Night of Pop, or something like that. Anyway, it's about the recording of We Are the World, and Lionel Richie. I had no idea that he was such a front man for the show. Got huge respect for him. And so Michael Jackson's there. God, you name it, they were there. I mean, a lot of them have passed on since. But just watching the original footage and why they came together and did it in the first place. It was mainly there were four black guys who basically said we've got to stop letting the white guys lead these shows because it's our community that is suffering. So it's a really powerful and fascinating look, especially for those of us who were alive when it came out. So I recommend that. The Greatest Night in Pop, something like that.
Yeah, no, just look for We Are the World. I suppose you'll find that you'll find the listing.
Yeah.
And Andrea, not to glamorize drug trafficking, but you made a comment there to say that obviously Griselda was underestimated because she was a female. I don't know, you may know this part, but I did a bit of reading on it when I watched it because it was quite good. But did you know that she actually mentored Pablo Escobar? So Pablo Escobar actually was her apprentice. So she taught him everything he knows, and he's the one that. So it was so technically the biggest drug baron in the history of Earth is actually female. And
So that wasn't included in the show, but there's
it wasn't in the show. But when you read up about it, it said that she.
Well, see above for my comments about women and when they get into it.
Yeah, right. Nice. All right, guys. Thanks for being here, and Scott, thanks so much for joining us. It's been great to have you. Come back and join us again.
It's been great. Thanks very much. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Andrea.
All right. We'll see you in a couple of weeks. All right.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. See you.